Hi everyone, a big welcome back to the G2Z online series. Thank you very much for joining us. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. My name's Nell Thompson. I'm the coordinator of the National Getting to Zero program, or as we call it, G2Z or G2Z, depending on where you're from. And I'll be hosting the webinar for you today. Getting to Zero was developed by the Animal Welfare League of Queensland, and they continue to support it to this day. G2Z offers its consulting, support and educational services at no charge to local governments and not-for-profits across Australia. Our continues to be on companion animal welfare and management issues such as strategy, legislation, operations, programs, and community engagement, working towards reducing intake to pounds and shelters and keeping pets in their homes. We invite people to take a look at our website at g2z.org.au, sign up for our regular e-news, connect with us via social media and get in contact with us if we can help or just have a chat about the issues that are facing you and your organisation or community. And so to today's session. Once I hand over to our presenter, there'll be around 45, 50 minutes of presentation, around 10 minutes of question time once the presentation is concluded. The recording of this webinar will be accessible via our website to everyone to watch at any time. We're going to ask that everyone mutes themselves during the presentation unless Trish indicates otherwise. And if you have questions, you can start putting them in the Q&A section and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the session. If you have very quick questions that relate to your understanding of the content, put your hand up and we'll try to get to them during the presentation. As always, please excuse any working from home background noises. Both Trish and I both have dogs in the room with us, so who knows what might happen. I'm so happy to have Trish McMillan here with us today. Many of you know Trish from her multiple visits over to Australia to speak at the G2Z Summit, as well as consult and conduct trainings at shelters across the country. You may have also attended one of her online trainings, and if you haven't, I highly recommend that you do. Trish is an internationally known speaker on the topics of animal behaviour and sheltering. She holds a Master of Science degree in animal behaviour and is a certified professional dog trainer. Trish first walked into a shelter in the mid-90s and has been hooked on shelter behaviour ever since. She worked for the ASPCA for nearly 8 years, first as Director of Animal Behaviour at their New York City shelter, and then with the field team, helping assess and rehabilitate dogs from cruelty cases, dogfighting and hoarding situations. Trish owns McMillan Animal Behaviour in North Carolina, where she lives in a tiny house, not for much longer, on her farm, Pibble Hill. Trish currently shares her life with many animals of 5 different species. Trish's professional work includes training and behaviour modification work with dogs, cats and horses. She speaks and consults nationally and internationally on animal sheltering issues, dog, cat and horse behaviour, dog aggression and defensive handling. She also runs a popular online shelter dog behaviour mentorship and other courses through the Shelter Behaviour Hub. She's also one of the founders of the Behavioural Euthanasia Grief Support Group, Losing Lulu. Over to you, Trish.
Wow, thank you for all that. I can't wait to get back to Australia and have some Tim Tams again one day, but we're going to blast through an hour presentation in 45 minutes. Perhaps I'm going to talk fast. So there's a lot to be covered. I was joking with Nell that I could she's like, oh, you can talk for as long as you want. I'm like, I will be here until tomorrow if you let me talk about this all I want. But I'm going to give you a brief overview of conversation-based adoptions and kind of my journey into understanding why this is state of the art these days. So the outline, usually when I do this live, we play the stand up, sit down exercise, but we will just do it virtually here. Talk a little bit about the importance of customer service, knowing our pets, understanding why we do conversation-based adoptions rather than the old way, and go through the concept of starting with yes, trusting your adopters, and supporting your adopters after they leave the shelter with their pet. So when I do this live, I have everybody stand up, so you can stand up in real life or in your mind. And I will have you sit down. Usually I do this one at a time when I'm doing it live. But if any of your pets are behind on vaccines, I would have to sit down now. I have 2 pets with cancer who will not be getting any vaccines except rabies. They're with my vet's blessing. Sit down if any of your pets are behind on any of the preventative products, like flea and tick meds. Sit down if you've ever had more pets than your landlord knew about. I am so guilty of that one. Sit down if you've ever had a dog of a breed that your landlord or a size that your landlord would object to. Sit down if you've ever had a pet picked up by animal control or if you relinquished one to a shelter. And I would wager that a lot of us would be sitting down now if I could actually see you. And I would absolutely be sitting down on the very first one, as well as several of the other ones. And when I do this live, what I will look at is your actual adoption form, your adoption policies, and see what your red flags are, what your, perhaps I will say no to this person. And all of these are reasons that people might be turned down. If you call the vet and find out, oh, 2 of Trish's animals are not up to date on their puppy and kitten vaccines. A lot of places you would say, no dog for you. You wouldn't talk to me and find out about the cancer. If you called my landlord, you might find out that I'm not actually allowed to have any more pets. And I've certainly been in that situation lots of time. My record is 10 more pets than my landlord knew about. So these are all things that we might say no to, but we actually aren't eligible to adopt from our own shelter. And that's usually a pretty eye-opening exercise when I do it live. So I'll talk a little bit about my journey to acceptance of conversation-based adoptions, because I did not start out that way. And in fact, my first adoption experience was with a shelter that didn't do conversation-based adoptions. They just did yes, no, red flags. If you don't tick all the boxes, no dog for you. And I was finishing university at the time. I had a couple months left to go, and I thought, I'm going to be working on a horse farm this summer. I would really like to have a dog to come and run around with me. So I called the shelter in the city where I was living at the time in Canada. And I was just like, what do I need to bring in? I don't want to have to not have the right ID or whatever I need. And they said, oh, well, and I told them I'm a student. I'd like to get a dog. And they just cut me off there. They didn't want to hear about anything else. They said, oh, we don't adopt to students. And the other reason they would not adopt me is because I was sometimes away from home more than 4 hours a day. They didn't wait to hear that I had 2 roommates who loved dogs. One of them's an agility judge now, that were fine with me getting a dog, that were fine with looking after them. If I had classes for more than 4 hours, they were just, no dog for you. So I never even went to the shelter. I never even tried. They were so rude on the phone. So I ended up buying a dog from a breeder, and she was a great dog. She was a Dalmatian. She did agility and obedience and therapy dog work. And through her, I ended up working with rescues. I worked with a Dalmatian rescue, and I also worked with a rescue that took dogs from the local animal control. And it was crazy. Even though I'd had that bad experience, once I started doing rescue, I became that person. I became like the no dog for you person. And a friend of mine sent me a list. I need to photograph this when I find it again. They sent a little book that I used for screening phone calls if somebody called for one of my rescue Dalmatians. And it was just as bad as the person who talked to me at that shelter a number of years before. I was, has intact male dog at home, no dog for you, or I was just looking for reasons to say no to them. And I sort of came from that attitude to work for the ASPCA, and the ASPCA was in the process of transitioning from the questionnaire-based adoptions, the landlord checks, the vet checks, the multi-stage adoption process, to a more open conversation-based type of adoption. And I went into that, I didn't literally walk around with a picket sign, but in my head, I was like, this will never work. We're going to get all kinds of returns. The dogs are going to get abused. This will never work. We can't do this. We have to look for red flags. And here I am talking to you in Australia about open adoptions 15 years later. So what changed my mind? Well, we went through the training. We brought in Meet Your Match, which is a ASPCA matchmaking program. I bet some of you have seen it in Australia. And my rule was, if I wanted to say no to somebody, I had to call my boss. That was the rule for everybody. If you had reason to believe this person shouldn't have a dog, you had to bring it somebody higher up. And my boss was a vice president of the ASPCA, and I did not want to bother her. So I ended up having conversations. And one of the really pivotal ones was when we got a 4-month-old Dalmatian in, and she had been given up by her owners because the older Dalmatian didn't like her. And, that's the right thing to do. Let us find her a great home. And you can imagine how many people came in when they saw a 4-month-old Dalmatian puppy on the shelter website. And they called me down. We had a behavior person do all the puppy consults just to get them off to a good start, encourage them to do classes. And I walked up to the front desk and I took a look at this family and I prejudged them. With my Dalmatian, I bought a mountain bike. I had to bike her miles and miles and miles every day and throw the ball and throw the ball and throw the ball until my arm was ready to fall off. Just crazy high energy dog. And I looked at this family, and it was a mom and a dad and a little boy, and they were not athletic people. I just thought, there is no way. Like, I was hoping for a marathon runner, but I had to have a conversation because that's the rule. I didn't want to call my boss. So I went over to talk to them. And that's Indy. That's my Dalmatian in the picture. And she lived for 13 years. She ended up getting really bad arthritis and couldn't walk anymore. So at 13, I put her down. This family had kept their Dalmatian alive till 15. So they'd done a better job than I had. And they knew all about the Dalmatian's special dietary needs. They knew all about how to deal with all of that hair. They knew all about the exercise, and they had a plan. They lived near Central Park. They went out just like I did with the ball and threw the ball for the dog and let him play with other dogs for his whole life. And once I had a conversation with them, just as if the shelter person had had a conversation with me all those years before, I realized these are great people these are the perfect people for this Dalmatian. They already know the breed. They have a plan for her exercise, and they went home with the dog, and she was not returned. There were a lot of these. I'm just pulling a couple of examples, but I had a number of epiphanies during this time. So we had a lab mix he was just one of those finger painters, they're just like making art in their kennels with their own poop. And it's a nice looking dog, but you had to be a high level walker to take him out. He'd jump and mouth and smear you with poop. Just nothing mean about him, but he was going to be a lot of dog. And this older woman came in and she said, I saw him on the website and he looks just like my old Labrador, and he just died and he was a teenager and very old. And I just saw his face and I had to have him. Like, there's no way you can handle this dog. He's a lot to handle here. And I thought, well, he's just going to get returned. He's coming back tomorrow. And the thing that this dog made me realize is returns are not the worst thing in the world. I thought, he's going to come back tomorrow. I'm sure he's going to go home. He's going to finger paint her apartment. She's going to drag her down the stairs. That'll be it. But I thought, even if that happens, I'm going to know a little more about him. I will know, at least, does he finger paint at home? Almost no dogs finger paint at home. That would be something that would help him get a home. So we made a plan. We talked about dog walkers. We talked about daycare. We talked about going down to the parking garage and throwing the ball around the cars. And we made a plan. And, she made it work. That dog did not come back the next day or the next week or the next year. And there's something to be said for forming that bond. I've done that. I've looked at a dog online and said, not you, I met you in the shelter. But I've had dogs of mine where I saw them online and was just smitten. I need to go meet that dog. And when you have that kind of bond, you are able to make plans around that dog. You can I am sure she had to get walkers and get daycare and deal with him during the adolescent stage, but it was worth it for her because he was very similar to her old dog. So the thing I'd like to get everybody thinking about here is that we're not just keeping animals forever in our shelter. Our job is to move them out. Our job is to find them homes. And we're actually in the used pet sales business. We're trying to move them along. So we need to be like this car sales guy. We need to treat customers with respect. Have you ever walked onto a car lot and not had somebody immediately say, "Hi, how are you? What are you looking for today?" They give you great customer service. They really want to sell these high dollar items. And if I brought that car back the next day and said, "You know what, it's making a funny noise. This is not the right car for me. Can I exchange it for one that doesn't make this noise?" They will repair it or they will return it. There's no, you're not going to get a whole lot of hassle from a car dealer. And think about trial adoptions. It's like leasing that car. You can take it and try it out and see if it's something you like. And trial adoptions are something that we do in the shelter business. How many of you have taken an animal home? I did it with this one. You're conveniently here, Rudel. So this little dog looks like a terrier. I have 14 chickens. I was sure she was going to come to the farm, try to murder the chickens, and I would have to find her another home. So I pulled her for our rescue, but she was essentially a foster dog for me. And I thought I'd like to have a smaller dog. All my dogs are big, but you're a terrier, you're going to murder chickens. And I brought her home and I had her on trial and she was great with the chickens. She's still here 3 years later. And we get to do this all the time. So why don't we offer it to our clients, our adopters? So channel this guy next time you're trying to, like, I want you to leave this dealership with a dog in your car.
Crazy Hubbard Whitfield. Come on down to Crazy Hubbard's used car lot. We've got prices slashing down from 2004s to 1989 models. Come on down here. You got to see these cars. We got ships. We got Ford. We got Haywood. We got trucks like this nice Nissan Titan right here. Get yourself in one. Drive it home. Your wife's going to love it.
So channel him a little bit rather than trying to keep all of the dogs in the shelter. I think we can all agree that the best place for a dog is in the home, and cats. This all goes for cats too. So adoptions start at the front door, just like at the car dealership. It is really ideal to have everybody greet people. One big problem that is pretty universally reported when people are trying to take home a shelter pet is they don't get their calls or emails answered. And I get it. It's busy. We got a lot. We're putting out big fires with little buckets all days, every day. But if we have to train a volunteer, if we have to hire another person, I really think it's important to answer every call or email, because those are potential donors. Those are potential adopters. We need to smile at people as they come in, be welcoming. I know you Australians are very friendly. I have been there. Make sure you're friendly to your adopters as well, because they're trying to do the right thing. They're listening to what we've been putting down for years. We've been putting out into the world, adopt, don't shop. They hear that message, they come in our door. We need to make sure that we match them with the right animal. So we're kind of matchmakers. And our job is to help adopters find the right match. So think about how you can greet everybody. I know sometimes the front desk person is multitasking and running dogs back to medical, doing other things. Maybe you need a volunteer. We have Walmart over here. They have people who are called greeters who just stand at the door. I don't know if you have stores in Australia where you have greeters like that, but it's a good model. It makes you feel welcome as soon as you come in. How can I help you? What are you looking for? Some of us have gone to appointments so that we can really be sure that we give people the attention they need when they're coming for a pet. That was started during the pandemic, and some people have hung on to that. And if it gives better customer service and helps more animals leave the shelter, that is great. So how many of you have hired this person or been this person? Please I'm here for the animals. I don't like people. And that's fine. I think you can have people who are not people at the shelter, but they should not be at the front desk. They can be in the background. They can be running the computers. They can be cleaning the kennels. They can be organizing your adoption events. But the people who are front facing, the people who are talking to the public should really be your smiliest, happiest, friendliest people. I know some people who, when they're hiring for their business, look for folks who have worked at McDonald's for at least 2 years, because boy, oh boy, if you can deal with 2 years of McDonald's corporate structure, go through all of their training, a lot of these folks come up with a really great work ethic and a really great customer service ethic. And that's really an important thing in sheltering. So we've already hired this nice, friendly person. What are we going to hand people when they come in? Well, many of us will hand them an application. I'd like to challenge that notion and have you consider calling it a survey, because you're not looking at it like applications sound scary. You put in a job application, they're going to wait and see if you're good enough. A survey, people like filling out surveys. Oh yeah, let me tell you what kind of home I have. Let me tell you what kind of animal I'm looking for. The Meet Your Match survey is a good one, and Adopters Welcome has a great survey. And that starts you off on a friendlier foot. We're going to trust our adopters. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to find out who they are, what their household is like, what they're looking for. And if we know our animals well, we should be able to make that match. And if you have different people marketing your animals to the adopters than the people who work with the animals, that do the behavior evaluations, make sure you've got really good information on the front of the kennel so that they can help make those matches. So in the old days, we would do these questionnaires. If you got an animal from me, it was more like an inquisition. A lot of them have gotcha questions. These, how much does it cost to keep an animal for a year? If it's your first time adopting a cat, you don't know how much cat food is for a year. You don't know what to budget for vet care. Wouldn't a better thing be to have a conversation about you're adopting a senior cat? This could be more expensive. Let's talk about pet insurance, rather than having them say, well, it costs $12 a year to have a cat. And, oh, that's wrong. No cat for you. So we used to do gotcha questions. I used to be very judgy. It was very hard to get an animal from me. And I wouldn't even have the conversation. I've prejudged you. You have an intact animal at home. You cannot have a shelter pet. We would do these reference checks and vet checks and landlord checks. And I will drop in here, if you think that every landlord you talk to was actually the landlord and not just, hey, sister, can you answer the phone XYZ and landlord business for the next hour because I'm at the shelter trying to adopt a cat. If you think that never happens, think again. So the modern way is a little bit different. I'm going to show you a video of a foster dog I had a few years ago, a lot of years ago, actually. He was a huge, let's see, 125 pounds, 60 kilo Doberman that we were trying to get some weight off of. He was like an Ottoman. Sweetest dog, sweet dog, loved people, loved dogs, had a few medical issues. I would have kept him myself, but I was like, you're going to be expensive. So I want you to keep him in mind, and I'll tell you a little more about him in a few slides.
Do you remember who wrote that evening for Iceland?
You want to play so bad, but you just want to play.
Look how sweet he is. How hard would it be to move that dog along? So I'm going to challenge some of the reasons that we have behind our restrictions. There are a lot of shelters that won't adopt to people with intact pets, and I was that person for a while. I still remember a little pit bull that we had in our rescue, 1997, and she was just a little pit bull puppy. And I remember a guy came along and he wanted her, but he had an older male pit bull who was still intact, and he was a dude and he just didn't want the dog to lose his balls. And he had never bred him. He had never let him escape and breed. And my puppy was already spayed. She was 4 or 5 months old. And I said no to this guy. And I'm still thinking about this 25 years later, because I should have. That dog sat in our rescue for quite a while. She was just a plain brindle pit bull, not a super easy dog to market in that environment. And he wanted her, and he already had a pit bull, and he knew how to look after this type of dog. Our dog was never going to make puppies with our dog. She's female. His dog is male, but she's fixed. She's desexed. So we're not going to cause more dogs to happen by adopting to someone with an intact pet. And some of the most responsible owners I know do not desex their pets. A lot of my friends do dog sports. I have replaced 5 knees. I've done 5 knee surgeries in my home, my personal pets and my fosters in the last 8 years. So I am very empathetic to, if you don't want joint problems, letting your dog stay intact a little bit longer. And you may be making people lie. If you're like, do you have any intact pets at home? They might lie to get the animal that you want. And this Borzoi, who is, I think she's in a, I don't know if she's racing in that picture. She's not wearing any, might be straight racing. This is one of the most winning Borzoi in our country. She has titles on both ends. She is ROM's dam of many, many, many champions. And she belongs, she's passed now, but she belonged to a vet friend of mine who took impeccable care of her animals. And she did breed Borzoi, and she had a waiting list years long for dogs coming from her kennel because they were awesome. They were behaviorally great. They were physically amazing. They won lots of stuff. I've never seen a Borzoi in a shelter. Have you ever seen a Borzoi in a shelter? I have zero problem with her program. But she can't adopt from any of you. She couldn't adopt from many. If she came to me in 1997, she wouldn't have been able to adopt from me. And I will tell you that during the time I knew this veterinarian, she had a colleague who developed a little bit of dementia and let her dogs breed indiscriminately. And her husband just went out and fed whoever was there. And when this breeder passed, she had 140 Borzoi just sort of running wild on her acreage, having puppies willy-nilly. And I can tell you for sure that not one single one of those dogs ended up in a shelter, because the Borzoi community rallied around. Everybody took 1 or 2 of them. And my friend, the veterinarian, took, I don't remember if it was 2 or 3, several of the oldest, sickest, most decrepit dogs from that particular case, and she kept them until they died of old age. She euthanized them when their health issues became problematic. And that is somebody who can't adopt from us. And she's doing rescue of her own breed, but she can't adopt from shelter. She's been turned down. So if you had a conversation with her, you would be pleading with her to please take an animal from your shelter. She is such a good owner. And then we've got the vet checks. I told you I won't pass a vet check. I've got several animals who are behind on vaccinations and they're not getting any more. And at our shelter, when we did the vet checks, we had most of our biggest adoption day was Saturday, and the second biggest one was Sunday. And if you're not open Saturday and Sunday, you are missing out on everybody with a job. But the vet clinics aren't open Saturday or Sunday. And when we had to do a vet check, they'd come in, they'd say, I would like to take this lovely Dalmatian home. It's a Saturday. We would say, no dog for you. You come back on Monday. We'll call your vet Monday morning. If they get back to us, we'll call you and you can pick her up Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, or maybe next weekend, because maybe you work during the week. And if people leave the car lot without the car, chances are they're not coming back. And if people leave your shelter without the dog, you might lose that adoption. So if you are still doing vet checks, I would like you to think hard about what advantage that gives you compared to the disadvantage of adding several days to the shelter stay, because that's a risk for getting sick, that's a risk for developing behavior problems, and that's a kennel that you can't put somebody else in who really needs that kennel. So how about having a conversation? If you had a conversation with me about why several of my pets are not vaccinated, you would understand. My vet would understand. So have a conversation with people. And then we got the landlord checks. And I felt pretty strongly about this too. Like, we need to check, because we can't be having animals come back to us. Having animals returned is the worst thing ever, but is it? That's the 10 dogs that I had in my apartment or in my rental house that my landlord never knew about. And I placed I kept one and I placed the rest, and they never knew. That landlord lived in a different country. A property management company gave us the lease. We signed the lease, never saw them again. And when we moved out, we repainted the puppy room. Nobody ever knew there were 10 extra dogs in the sunroom. So if you had tried to call him, it would have been hard to call him. You would have had to get hold of the property management company. And they wouldn't have known how many pets I had at home anyway. So how about if we treat adopters like adults and tell them, like, some buildings have size limits, some buildings have breed limits. Do you know what yours are? And treat them like adults, treat them like they can do their own research. And maybe they know that the landlord is never going to check. And I think that is between our adopter and the landlord. You don't want to make them lie, because if they give you their sister's number and she answers the phone, XYZ property management, that adopter may be reluctant to come back to you if they have behavior problems or other issues with the pet, because you've started your relationship with a lie. And again, if the animal comes back, you just got a free foster, you know more about them. So how about a conversation? Talk to people. What do you know about your lease? Because they've signed it, they should know. So here's Rambo, the Doberman that you saw a few slides ago, in his new home with his dad, who is a veterinarian, and his mom, who is a veterinarian, is taking the picture. And his sister, the Golden Retriever, who was introduced to him immediately, is doing great. And those veterinarians came and met Rambo. They loved him. I loved them. I'm like, oh my God, he might need new hips. Please, please, please take this dog. I can't afford new hips myself. They had to wait 2 weeks because that rescue insisted on a home check. I was so embarrassed sending someone to look at the homes of 2 veterinarians to see if they're good enough for this dog. I could tell after one conversation with them, I was ready to stuff him in the car. They had traveled 2 hours to see him. They loved the dog, and they had to wait 2 weeks to get him back. And in that 2 weeks, I could have fostered another Doberman. We could have pulled another dog who was going to die out of a shelter. And no, but we waited for that home check, and they went and looked at that home, and guess what? It was fine. So how about if we have a conversation? How about if we say, are you unsure about your fence height? I'm happy to do a Zoom consult if you'd like to walk your fence, and I can help you with that. But let's have a conversation, because it's often framed as like, well, we want to make sure they can't get out of the fence. I think there are other ways to do that if that is truly a concern, and I think it should be an opt-in. But I will tell you, I will not adopt from a place that is going to do a home check. I live in 14 square meters right now with my 4 dogs and 3 cats. It's a little embarrassing. It is not something that I love to show off. Like, we are all crammed in here like sardines. I'm building a house. We will be out of here at some point, but it's cramped and it's messy, and I don't want the mayhem of somebody I don't know coming to my farm and judging my housing situation. I assure you, these dogs have a very, very, very good life. And if you had a conversation with me, you would realize that. Because look at that, they cram very well. They're very stackable dogs. That's not the ones I have now. Well, I still have this one. So some of the things that I have done too are the gotcha questions. And that's so unfair. That's really so unfair. So I thought about the house training question, and My childhood dog in the 70s, delightful dog. We knew nothing about dogs. We got a dog from a farm and took him home. And if I hadn't had a dog since the 70s and I had watched my mom house train in the 70s, if you said, how would you house train your dog? I might answer the way my mom house trained my dog. She rubbed his nose in it. That's what you did in the 70s. And if I hadn't learned anything between then, if I hadn't had a dog, I might answer that question wrong and then no dog for you. As opposed to saying, would you like information about house training? You're taking a puppy home. They need to be house trained. I'd be like, oh, you're right. I haven't had a dog since the 70s. I have no idea how to house train a dog. And if somebody has ticked a box that says, I would like information about this, they will actually listen to you when you give them that information. So one of the worst ones I've seen is, will you give your cat exercise outside? Because it kind of frames, such a trick question. It frames it as if, yeah, of course you're going to exercise your cat, but the trick is outside. And many shelters will not adopt a cat who is going to be outside. What would you do if your dog chewed something? Well, if I hadn't had a dog since the 70s, you don't want to know what happens to dogs who chew back then. Where will your dog sleep at night? Like, all of these things, how much does it cost? These could all be a conversation. And if it's something that people want to know, they will listen to you. And another thing that I've had to reframe of late is the pets as gifts, because a study actually came out that indicated that pets who were received as gifts were actually less likely to be relinquished. You're more likely to keep that pet if there's also a connection to a human, which just blew my mind. So of course, we weren't happy with just handing puppies out willy-nilly to anybody. The compromise that we made after reading this study is we went from no pets as gifts to, how about we do a gift certificate? How about if we have a conversation about everybody in the family wanting this pet, and we deliver them? Because admit it, you guys have seen those videos of the little old man who's always wanted a puppy, and he's opening a box on Christmas morning, and there's a bowl and a leash, and then they bring the puppy in, and everybody's in tears, and you were in tears too, because that is just the cutest. The look of surprise when somebody gets an animal that they really, really, really wanted. So I think there are ways to capitalize on the fact that pets who are given as gifts are more likely to stay in the home. And there are ways to make that happen in a way that makes everybody happy. So there's the house that I am broadcasting from right now. That is my tiny house with, I only had 3 dogs when I moved in here. I've adopted the little scruffy thing who was visiting. And a lot of these income questions, I have seen adoption forms that had so much information on them. What's your driver's license? What's your address? What's your phone number? Who's your employer? How much do you make? Somebody could steal your identity from the amount of information. So be careful, check with legal about what you're actually allowed to ask. And I would argue that a lot of these questions about you must have a fenced yard, and we will prioritize people who have their own house, those are proxy questions for wealth. And I will tell you, I have done both sheltering and private consulting for a long time, and I have met some poor little rich dogs. I have met some dogs who had the yard and they had the kitchen and there was a gate, and they never came past that kitchen gate, and they were fed by the help, and they were let outside by the help, and they were picked up by a groomer, and they really had very little bond with the family because they couldn't go on the white carpet. We didn't want the dog getting the furniture stinky. And I have met pets belonging to people who were unhoused, who get to go everywhere with that person, who are never apart from them, who are just so incredibly bonded and well socialized and walk on leash with 2 fingers. I don't think that poor people don't deserve pets. I think we need to offer people some help sometimes. And I have needed help at times in the past, and that is not something to be embarrassed about. But we should not just be adopting to the wealthy. I don't think that's fair. I live in a very poor area of North Carolina, and I have some very great pet owners around me. Another thing to consider that might be a barrier to adoption is dog meats. and I've consulted in Australia, and I have talked to many of you about this. So I have 4 dogs, and I would say one of them would be comfortable going to a shelter and meeting a new dog. One of them would be okay, and 2 of them would not. 2 of them would be really freaked out being in a shelter. And the one who would be really awesome, I might lie to you and just bring that one dog and say, yeah, this is the only one I got. He's one of the ones with cancer. He doesn't travel very well now. So right now I have 0 dogs that I would feel comfortable taking to a shelter and doing a dog meet like this. And I bet some of you have the same problem. If you didn't have the privilege of being able to test drive the animals from the shelter, I bet some of your personal dogs would have a hard time with it too. And my Doberman takes about an hour to warm up to a new dog. Sometimes a few meetings, sometimes a couple of meetings. And she's not mean, she's fearful. She'll back up and yelp, and she's a pandemic puppy. She's great with dogs, but she's a little picky about her friends, and that first meeting is going to look horrible. There's going to be lots of yelping and showing of teeth and craziness, and I wouldn't put her through that. I know how to do a slow introduction. She's met plenty of my friends' dogs, and we just take it slow and do it at her speed, and she always ends up being friends with them. Even the little tiny Chihuahua, she decided was okay. I think if people don't know how to do a dog meet, that's certainly a service you can offer. But I was at a shelter in Australia with Nell a few years ago, and we were talking about doing dog play. It's really important that you know what your dogs are like off leash with other dogs. I think that is our responsibility, because if you are not doing off leash dog introductions, I guarantee your adopters are, and they don't have any training in doing this and breaking up dog fights. They're going to take that dog straight to the dog park and be like, the book said to socialize your dog. I'm going to set them free in a dog park. So if you don't know if that dog's going to kill another dog if they're off leash, you are doing your adopters a disservice. And if you know that they're very loud on leash, but you've never actually let them meet, some of those are just frustrated. And when they go to their only pet home and go to the dog park and the adopter lets them off leash and they're fine, then you guys look kind of silly for saying only dog home, very reactive, because they're just frustrated. So if you are good at doing dog play, this picture was taken in a dog play group I did a bunch of years ago, then you know your dogs really well. You know how long it takes for them to warm up to a dog. You know if they prefer male or female, large or small. So I was at this shelter. We had just brought a big Mastiff mix out who was pretty good with other dogs. Once we got her in, she was not doing well in the kennel. She was at risk at this shelter, I believe, if she continued to deteriorate. As I was walking past a play yard, Nell motions me over. She says, Trish, talk to these people. And the shelter was busily turning down an adoption because the couple who was in meeting her was not going to bring in their German Shepherd to meet her. And I talked to them, and I was like, and I found out that the German Shepherd's Mastiff friend had just died, and the German Shepherd was not doing well at all at home. She did not travel well in the car. She was very nervous. And I talked to this couple and I said, well, how did you introduce the German Shepherd to the Mastiff when she came home? And they walked me through a beautiful introduction protocol. Like, we start on a neutral territory and we do parallel walks, and they knew how to do a dog introduction. This dog needed out. They wanted a big old dog. And I hope she got to go home from that shelter. I don't remember what happened. Maybe Nell does, but I still have that dog in my mind as one of those examples of, this is why we don't have to make dog meets mandatory, because they were about to be turned down, and I hope they gave them a chance. If the dog is not dangerous that we're sending home, and we had just had her in playgroup and she was not dangerous, and the dog at home is not dangerous, and the people know how to do a slow introduction, that's actually safer than they come, do the dog meet, we stuff them both in the back of the ute and you go home. Like, what could possibly go wrong with that? That's not a great model either. So I told you I was turned down with my first shelter contact because I was a student. So that has left me, now that I've gone past the no dogs for you stage, I am pretty sympathetic to students. I will have a conversation with them. So this is a foster dog I had. He was great little dog. He was not doing well in the shelter, but he was great with other dogs. So I took him home, put a tiny bit of training on him. He really didn't need much. He was a delightful dog. And this young man came. His mom is a friend of my pit bulls on Facebook. She messaged me about my foster dog that I had put videos of him playing with my pit bull on Facebook. And she said, my son really wants a dog. I'll be here as his safety net. If he needs to go out of town, the dog can come and stay with me. And I had a conversation with her. And then I met this young man and his girlfriend. Look how much Skipper likes her. Emily Weiss went through a similar thing. She was my boss at the ASPCA for a while. She's a PhD behaviorist. She was less honest than I was. She went into the shelter with a picture of somebody else's fenced yard, and she just lied her way to adopting a shelter dog. And she kept that grumpy old chow mix for the rest of his life, and she adored him. So be careful about making your adopters lie. It does not put you on a great standpoint, and returns are not the devil. Returns are a free foster. And look at the life Skipper has now. He goes out hiking. I am sure this young man has finished college. This was probably about 6 years ago. And this dog's still in his home, and he's very, very loved. I get updates from his mom. So I want you to think about it. How many of you have been declined for adoption? I am sure there are some people in this audience, despite the fact that I believe you're all shelter and rescue people. I still remember that was 1989 that I was declined for that adoption. And that was like a knife to the heart. Like, I am the kid who was feeding all of the dogs when I was at home. I was training all the animals. I was training other people's animals. I was crazy, crazy, crazy animal kid for my entire life. And to be told that I was not good enough for a shelter pet, I'm still talking about it. It was 1989. Did I ever donate to that organization? No, they were actually shut down for hoarding not that long after they turned me down. They turned down so many adopters that they became very overwhelmed, and the province shut them down. I certainly would not recommend them. I still would not recommend them, just based on how they treated me back then. And they will not get a donation from me. So every time you say no to somebody, like if they come in drunk, like that was an automatic, okay, we're not going to adopt you if you're clearly impaired. But I think everybody deserves a conversation, and you will be, if you start doing this, you will be surprised, just as I was, and you will be very impressed with people. So what do we do instead? Okay, I'm going to crumple up my red flag application. What do I replace it with? We can't just go to the parking lot and hand animals out. That's not what I'm saying at all. Well, if you go to HSUS, you can download a really cool booklet called Adopters Welcome. And it goes through in depth how to do conversation-based adoption. And they have a survey, I believe it's on page 22 of the booklet, that you can put your own logo on. If you like it, you can use it for, try it for a month, see if people like it better than your application. And it asks people what they'd like to know. Check this box if you'd like to know more about house training. And the whole concept is starting with yes. Let's not look for the red flags. Let's not look for the reason to say no. Let's start with, this looks like a delightful family, and they're adults and they have come in to do the right thing, and let's talk to them like they're human beings. I worked for an organization where I had to have a roommate from time to time at a hotel. And the policy book for that roommate situation, I'm still giggling about it, because you could tell everything somebody had ever done to their roommate by looking at the book. And there was one rule: try to remain modest, don't walk around the hotel room naked. And there's another one, like, don't eat food in your room and leave big stinky boxes in the garbage. And I'm just picturing, like, at some point, somebody sat on their bed in that hotel room and ate pizza naked. I'm sure that happened at some point to make all these rules happen. And that's an example of rules based on exceptions. And I can tell the whole history of an organization by looking at their adoption policy because, well, that Doberman knocked over a kid. We're not adopting people with kids under 7 anymore, ever, even if the dog is 20 years old and loves children. It's just policy that happened. A dog got returned, which is the worst thing ever. Return rates in this country run around 15%. We're kind of putting these animals into an arranged marriage. The marriage return rate is 50%. So dogs are way better than we are. And there will always be some mismatches. And if they took this little Aussie home and she hated their other Aussie or tried to eat their cat or tried to eat their kid, I want them to bring that dog back. I don't want them to be a forever home, even if it's a real mismatch. Like, now we know more. She doesn't like male dogs. Let's try not to find her a home with another male dog. And our goal is to reduce length of stay. All of these policies, I think it's important to have some urgency. The ASPCA shelter was a limited intake shelter. We got to pick and choose everything except our cruelty cases. And I admit I got pretty complacent. I'm like, well, the animal is safe with me, so I don't really need to rush things. But you know what happens if they stay too long in a shelter is their behavior deteriorates, the kennel presentation deteriorates. And I have seen whole families walk out of a shelter in tears because they walk through the kennel and everybody hit the bars at face height as they walk through. That they're not going to go out and say, go to this shelter, they have great dogs. I mean, like, my kid is still crying about it. That was a very scary experience. And I heard recently, I got to find this source, that it can cause permanent brain changes in the dog if they are in a kennel situation for more than 2 weeks. I know solitary confinement in humans causes brain changes at a month. So the longer we're keeping them there, the more we are making them difficult to adopt out, and we are putting their lives at risk. And another thing to think about is, do you know what your cost of care per day is? And my spitball number that I use when I'm consulting is between $25 and $50 a day, depending on how, might be more in Australia. Everything's expensive in Australia. And that is $9,000 to $18,000 a year to keep that animal in your shelter waiting for that unicorn home. And when I think, I'd like the length of stay to be 2 weeks or less so that we are not risking the animal's mental or physical health quite as much. That means we're putting 24 animals through every kennel every year. And if we keep this cat for a whole year because he's a little spicy and we want to find exactly the right home, that is 24 cats that we couldn't pull from another shelter if we're limited intake. Think about what you could do for your community. How many desexing surgeries could you do for $18,000? How many animals could you keep from being born? How many vaccines? How many microchips? How many bags of food? Like, that's a lot of community help you could do if you let the animals leave your shelter. And I think some of us have gone a little bit too far on the keeping animals in the shelter forever, even if they're not actually going to be pets, if they're not cut out to be pets. So I don't think behavioral euthanasia is the end of the world. I do run a grief support group, which you're welcome to join. It's called Losing Lulu. Say, hey, I heard Trish speak. I'm a shelter worker. I want to join. But it's for people who have lost a pet to their own behavior. And it's heartbreaking when we send out an animal and the adopter has to euthanize it. When we outsource that task to our adopter, I think it's a very inhumane thing to do to that human. So whenever I had to hold off a vein for euthanasia of one of my behavior dogs in the shelter, I thought about the family that did not have to do that. Like, I'm the shelter person. I need to be tough. I need to make this call sometimes. So, and again, if you've got really dangerous dogs hitting the kennels at face height when people walk through, you are scaring people away from your friendly dogs. And you're also making your friendly dogs less friendly because that behavior is very contagious. The other thing is, if you send somebody home without a cat, you know how easy it is to get a cat. If you're sending them home without a dog. At our shelter, they actually physically walked past a pet store on the way to the subway. If we said no to them, they were going to see a $2,000 Yorkie in the window, and they might very well be supporting a puppy mill instead of us. And that Yorkie would not be desexed. That Yorkie would maybe have one set of vaccines. You can get a pet on the internet. You can go to Gumtree and get a free cat, or a very low cost. And they don't know how much it's going to cost to desex that cat. They don't know how much it's going to cost for all the full set of vaccines on a kitten. All they're seeing is free kitten, and they're not going to have our support. So I really think that our shelter pets are the best pets. I want you to leave this car lot with a puppy in your car, because I want them to have our safety net. More and more shelters are giving a really good safety net to their community now, because keeping a pet in a home, that counts as a win. That is animal welfare. That is a good thing. So we might offer behavior help for the puppy. We had training classes at my shelter for the puppy. If they do have an intact animal at home that they don't want to be intact anymore, we can offer them low-cost desexing. We might have a pet food pantry. We might offer boarding if they were to lose their housing. But if they adopt from Gumtree, they're not going to get any of that. So I really hope that I've persuaded some of you to step over to the conversation-based side with me and consider starting with yes, and just really think about being the matchmaker. What does the pet need? What does the person need? And don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. Like that Labrador, that was not the perfect home. I was hoping to get him into a marathon runner's home, but we made it work. And the fact that this person really, really, really wanted the dog made her more likely to take the extra steps. So don't make assumptions about people, and reframe your returns. Just think of them as fosters. It really helped me when I started doing that. So we want to put our best paw forward when we're marketing our animals. I don't think we should be lying. I don't think we should be saying this little dog is perfect with everybody. If he really wants to eat cats, I think we can say that. But boy, if you read some of my write-ups for my dogs back in the 90s, whew, it was all just like, do not adopt, do not take this animal home, whatever you do, because here's all the things that are wrong with it. And when you think about, if you're on a dating site, you would not say, you know, I'm extremely grumpy before I have my first cup of coffee, and I'm divorced and I have too many animals. Like, that's not what you're going to lead with. You're going to lead with the good stuff. And if I saw this cute little face online and I went in to adopt him and you said, yeah, he really, really goes after cats, I could say at that point, yeah, I've got 3 cats at home. I can't, that's not going to be a fit for me, but I'm in the shelter, and I would definitely try to find them a cat-friendly dog if that's what they were looking for. I do not want people leaving the shelter without a pet if they come in to look for one. But I think we need to lead with the good stuff and disclose the issues in the conversation and see if, is this something you can work with? Here's what we can offer. He's got a health condition. We're going to help you with the surgery, or we're going to help you with the first bottle of medication, whatever it might be you can do for him. So think about whether your long stay dogs are in fact dogs who can go to a home. If it's an only pet home, no kids, no cats, there's not a lot of those. I'm kind of the hermit living on the farm. I don't have kids, but I have kids in my life. Actually, last time I was in Australia, my pet sitter sent me a picture of the contractor who's building the new house. With his wife had brought him lunch. His wife had brought him his toddler son to visit. And all of my dogs were milling around in the picture. She took a picture of my dogs and the contractor and the child. And I thought, you know, I'm really glad that I have this particular set of dogs. I used to take home the troubled dogs and become more of a hermit because I couldn't have people over. And that's not a nice thing to do to people. So consider, if you take my mentorship, we go through a process of creating a document around behavioral euthanasia. And really hash out what is adoptable in our community and what is not. So that adoptability criteria is one of the more valuable things you will take out of the mentorship if you want to take it. If you're not sure, a lot of times my students will be like, okay, I got a question today from somebody whose dog came in with a beautiful home history, lived with kids, no problems, no resource guarding, no nothing, and had an incident at the shelter where he went after somebody through the cage. And she's like, what do I do? That's not great behavior. And if you've got a long history with this dog of being fine in a home, I think we need to try. We need to send him out overnight for a foster, maybe pay a trainer to do a behavior foster. And if it is just shelter related behavior, if this dog is perfect in a home and a maniac in the shelter, find a way to adopt him from the foster home or send him to a foster-based rescue. So there's some great research around overnight fosters, and that will often give you the answer. This little guy is my pit bull. It's Theodore. He's awesome. He was a finger painter in the shelter. He was a bad finger painter. My shelter picture of him, his little paws are yellow up to the wrist. And I was pretty sure he was going to be hard to house train. And look at him. He's like a cat. He's fastidious about his little white paws. That was just shelter behavior. So even an overnight foster lowers the cortisol level, really gives you great information. I encourage people to make it easy for people to take a home to check out a dog overnight. And foster to adopt is a really wonderful way for people, because going in and saying, okay, forever home, we're going to take this animal home forever, that's scary. But if you say the Doberman Rescue, one of the cool things they did was they would take the check and they would not cash it for 2 weeks. So take the dog home. Here's how to do an introduction. If it doesn't go well, bring the dog back. And if you brought the dog back, they would ask if you wanted to donate the check anyways, which people often did. So just something to consider. The reduced fee adoptions, I was also marching around with, that will never work. And that doesn't mean you get rid of your adoption counseling. None of this means you are handing puppies out in the Walmart parking lot. You're still going to have a conversation. But think about how many of your personal animals you paid for and how many you got for free. I'm not the only one who has a house full of free animals. Do they get treated any differently in your house? So this is Asheville. Asheville Humane has sales all the time. I got my cat from them on a pay what you want day. And I didn't look into what their usual adoption fees were. I went in and I took home a 7-year-old cat with litter box problems. And I paid them $40. I thought that seems reasonable. Look at the specials they run. They have free cats. They have $3 cats. They actually got more money from me on a pay what you want day than they would have if I had gone to the $3 special a few weeks later. But I had been thinking about a cat. And the reason I went to the shelter on that day was like, oh, it's a sale. I'm Scottish. I like a deal. So I think the time to do a fee waived adoption special or a reduced fee adoption special is right when your shelter is starting to fill up, not when you've got crates stacked in the hallways, but when you start seeing the numbers creep up. Move along some of the animals that you can move along easily, and fee waived adoptions are great. So here's some of the 30 animals I have on my farm. I'm not a hoarder. Most of them are chickens. But can you tell by looking at these glossy, happy, well-fed animals which ones I paid for and which ones I got for free? Look at their faces. Can you tell? You placing bets now? That one I paid $40 for. That one I bought as a companion to my free horse, because you can't just have one horse. And some of the chickens I paid for. Some of them I got for free. And the rest of them are all free animals. Another thing we can do is take the shelter to the people. I bet you've heard this. I bet you have friends and relatives who have said, oh, I could never go into a shelter. How can you do that? It must be so depressing. And there are people who will never set foot in a shelter, but we can take the animals to them. Those weekend fosters, those overnight fosters that I hope you will make easy for people. They might have a neighbor, they might have a sibling, they might have a friend who is looking for a pet and comes over and meets yours, and they never have to go back to the shelter. A lot of us do field trips. I live in the mountains of North Carolina, and both of the local shelters will check a dog out for a hike. You have 2 arms and a heartbeat, you can hold a leash, take a dog on a hike. And Adoption Ambassadors is a really cool program that's up on the ASPCA Pro site that goes through, they have a really great survey, they do help you with the matchmaking, they give each of the animals a felinality or a caninality, and it's really cool. People are really happy with it. So here's one of my foster wins. I refuse to call them foster fails because it was definitely a win bringing this little kitty home. I think foster to adopt can really help us have some of that urgency, reduce that length of stay, because it's kind of an arranged marriage. I don't know about you guys, but I have about 3 days every time I bring an animal home where I'm like, what have I just done? And it's fine. Like we worked it out. Not all relationships are forever. I would love to see some of the forever home stuff go away, because I do want you to bring the animal back if they are fighting with the other pets in the home. If you have a child who is bursting out in hives. So, and we get to do this as shelter people. I don't think it's fair that we make it so hard for our adopters to do the same. So Adoption Ambassadors, you teach people to be their own cheerleaders for their pets. They take their fosters around with little adopt me vests. Sometimes they have little cute cards that go in the vest, like baseball cards that they can hand out. And it's a foster to home placement. The animal never has to come back to the shelter. And that is great for cats who don't do well in a shelter. And you can train your fosters in doing the adoption and getting the check and bringing the paperwork back to you. It's not rocket science. And I really think it's our duty to stay in contact with people, especially if they're taking home a behaviorally challenged animal. The industry standard seems to be 3 days, 3 weeks, and 3 months. Sending out an email, also a great way to get updates for social media. I sent this update to the shelter. I got that dog from almost 14 years before I took that picture on her last day of life. And I sent them updates throughout her life of all the cool things I did with that dog. And that might bring them more donations and support. And I will support that shelter because they let me adopt the dog. So hopefully I've got you all fired up about getting some great customer service, having positive interactions, maybe pilot conversation-based adoptions. Do it for a month, see how it goes. You can always go back. But if you treat adopters like adults, if you know your animals well and make those great matches, it becomes a win-win. Like my feelings around doing adoptions once we went to a conversation-based model, I felt a lot better about it because I was saying yes more often and I was having better relationship with those adopters because we'd had these conversations. So consider foster to adopt. And I don't know how many times I have said this, but returns are just a short-term foster. They're not the end of the world. So that is me. If you'd like to stay in contact, I run Shelter Behavior Hub. We have lots of courses up there. We have courses on body language and enrichment and intake. We also have longer 13-week mentorships. The Shelter Dog Training Mentorship is opening March 9th. That's the one that's open right now. It's 13-week deep dive into all things training. It's fantastic value for the money. I co-teach that with Sue Alexander. She's the primary instructor and she reads textbooks for fun. Like she knows this nerdy stuff backwards and forwards, and she will give you some amazing tips for training your shelter animals. And if you would like to have a consult with me about your shelter, about a particular animal in your shelter, you can go to trishmcmillan.com. And if you want legit behavior advice, go to Shelter Behavior Hub and McMillan Animal Behavior. If you want ridiculousness with this cute pit bull, you can join Pibbling with Theodore. He actually has more friends than either of my other pages, so maybe I need more ridiculousness on the other one. And yeah, my Instagram and TikTok are also just ridiculousness. So if you want heavy duty information, go to the top links. And if you want silliness, go to the bottom links. So thanks for inviting me to talk. I have talked more than an hour. I'm sorry. I told you I could talk about this for 20 hours, probably. It's something I'm very excited about.
Well, and the fantastic thing is that there's been really trials and happy to extend, and also loaning equipment for people who are adopting pets out, or taking them on a trial. So yeah, really great discussions in the chat. There is a question here. Trish, can you tell everyone about the research into predictors of adoption success, in brackets, matching expectation versus owner characteristics?
Hang on, I am looking at the wrong one. I'm looking at
Yeah, no, it's in the chat, not in the Q&A.
All right. So tell me again, I was reading the wrong one. Like, that's not what she's reading.
No, can you tell everyone about the research into predictors of adoption success, matching expectations versus owners' characteristics?
Yeah,
So I think, go on.
Yeah, I am not as familiar with the research as you are, but as I know
From memory, there was a research paper published, I think a few years ago, saying that people often didn't walk out with what they went in for, what was their perfect thing in mind. I'm going in for a small breed puppy, and they come out with an 18-year-old cat kind of thing. So,
that's good marketing right there. That's good adoption counseling. Yeah.
I don't always, I went to a shelter a little while ago, and I couldn't even, the potential adopters couldn't even go in and have a look. They had to write down what it was that they wanted. And I said, well, haven't you ever fallen in love? Like, how do you know what you want sometimes until you see it? So
now that's an impulse buy, and now no pet for you, because we
that's
don't want
right. Exactly.
I will not tell you how many of these were that little scruffy dog. Absolutely no intention of taking an animal home when I went into the shelter that day. I'm delighted I did.
She's absolutely perfect. We do have a question in the Q&A, and this is actually a really good one. So Dursum says, we put pet portfolios with a little blurb about the dog, helping people to get to know more about the dog's personality. We then list restrictions for that dog, ranging from age restrictions to experience to the requirements of how active or quiet a lifestyle they may need. We sometimes have dogs with 5 to 6 restrictions listed at the bottom of their profile. It can come across a little overwhelming to potential adopters, seeing so many restrictions on a potential pet. What would you suggest in terms of improving this?
Yeah, I would not put the restrictions out front. I would say if the animal is absolutely going to murder small children, and that's the reason you have no children on there, I would question whether you should be adopting that animal out at all. If it's just, I'm geriatric and creaky, and I would prefer not to be fallen upon by a toddler, I think that's a conversation. I think those restrictions should be a conversation. So every animal has a unique selling point. I learned about USPs in Australia from a marketing person. I've been talking about them ever since. So everybody's got a cute thing they do, and it's your job to find the one unique selling point of that animal. You adopted an 18-year-old cat. What was his unique selling point? There was surely something about him.
Yeah, exactly. There's always something.
And if they don't have something, you can teach them something. If it is just a plain blob of a dog with no personality, you can teach that dog to roll over. You can teach them to shake a paw. You can teach. I had a friend who taught a shelter dog to flush a toilet, and that got on the news. New Zealand, they taught a dog to drive a car. You can teach them a thing, but I think you need to lead with positive things. And it seems like a bit of a bait and switch, but if they come into the shelter, I'd also question how legitimate 5 or 6 restrictions sounds like. You have an idea in your head of what this dog needs, but consider that when you fall in love, you may be able to get past things. The woman who fell in love with that Labrador was able to get past the fact that he was covered in poop, and get past the fact that he needed a lot of exercise, and the fact that she had fallen in love with him allowed her to make accommodations. And I think with a conversation, you might find, for example, a kid is not a kid is not a kid. I have nieces and nephews who I would trust with my dogs when they were toddlers. I remember my little nephew sitting on the floor with Kenya, that old dog that I showed you, just throwing a tennis ball for her, and she'd gently pick it up and gently bring it over and gently put it on him. And he was so good with her. And I have friends whose teenagers I would not allow around that dog. They were absolutely unreliable. So I think having a conversation, because if it's a geriatric dog who doesn't want a toddler to fall on them, I have met very, very, very careful toddlers who pet the dogs very gently. I think if you've got 5 or 6 restrictions, really think about how essential it is, because finding somebody who has no kids, no dogs, no cats, no UPS, no Amazon Prime, no visitors, like, if the dog is super dangerous and that's why they have all the restrictions, you shouldn't be sending them out. And if you could make accommodations for some of them, I think that needs to be a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. There's a question here from Ellen. Can you point us to any data from shelters who don't do dog meets at the shelter? I love the idea, but would love to see how it works.
Yeah, I don't think anybody has done research on it per se, but I believe that it should be flexible. And I would say, I don't know your adopters. I don't know what types of dogs you are sending out. I don't know how, what kind of screening you do to make sure that your end of the deal is a dog who's not going to be dangerous. But I would suggest piloting it. And it does need to be done in conjunction with a robust playgroup program so that you know your dogs well. And pilot it for a month and see. You will have some adopters like me who absolutely know how to do an introduction, who do not need it. And you're treating them like a toddler, saying you've got to bring all of your dogs into the shelter and they've all got to meet the dog, because I will not do that. I will not do that to my dogs with cancer. I will not do that to my dog who's grumpy meeting other dogs at first. I'll go elsewhere. And
Yep.
I have.
Yeah, and someone's made a point in the chat saying adopters also weight behaviour info from a home environment more heavily than info from the shelter, even if it's just overnight. And that's absolutely true, you know, because everyone knows that how they're behaving in the shelter is not necessarily how they're going to behave at home. So fostering, you know, is right up there as well. And one comment I wanted to make was about everything that Trish has said also applies to your foster applications. And, you know, an example of that at the moment is, you know, I'm going through, I recently lost my geriatric cat, and I saw a geriatric cat on Facebook the other night, and that was looking for a foster home. Now. I do have a type. So I messaged them. There was no instructions on how to contact them about fostering it. But so I thought, okay, well, I'll message them. That's the only way I know how. Nothing. I had to follow them up. And then they said, well, send us your info. I have experience and work from home. And I still haven't heard anything. So, you know, this is a 20-year-old cat, apparently, that's sitting somewhere looking for a safe place to land, and taking up a pen, taking up space, costing people money. So everything that Trish has said, we need to also apply to our fosters, because why put our fosters through the ringer? You know, we're all the same people. We all started from the same place. None of us was born with all this information. How did we learn it? Through experience, and hopefully through people supporting us. So let's be the people that support and get those animals out there. Lots and lots of big thank yous to you, Trish, and thank you for your time. It's a ridiculous hour of the evening in North Carolina, and Trish really needs to go and have a little sit down, I'd say, by now. But we really appreciate your time, as always, and we hope to see you back here in on our big island. Yeah, absolutely. But we really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we hope to see lots of people in the mentorships and over at the Shelter Behaviour Hub. And we really appreciate everyone attending today. It has run over, but I think it's been fantastic discussions all round. So thanks very much for your time. All right, we shall see you soon. Keep an eye on the social media and the e-news for updates on what our next webinars and perhaps other announcements might be. All right, talk soon, everyone.
Thanks now. Bye-bye.
Bye.